it's still a beautiful stadium.
Hmm.
I mean, it ranks 20 years later, 25 years, almost 25 years later, it's still one of the nicer ballparks for that size in the country.
He gets it
Uh,
high in the air. Left field. This one's got a chance. And let's go on a cowhide. Joyride. Sound the horn. The Railcats clear the yard.
Hello, RailCats fans, and welcome back to the RailCats Talk podcast. He's Chuck Polarek. I'm Kyle Svetich, and the day has come. We told you it was coming. We've been hyping it for weeks and weeks and months, or whatever the case may be. We have the first employee, the first general manager, the overseer of the project to build the steel yard, Roger Wexelberg. Thank you for joining. How are we doing?
all right, Kyle, thanks for having me on.
It's the backstory of all this is we had Brandon on and we were talking about just getting a bunch of Railcats memorabilia. He goes, "Yeah, I just go on eBay and blah blah this and that." And next thing I know, Chuck's over here eBaying it up, and he's like, "You're not gonna believe this. I got the first general manager of the Railcats. I got the connection. I got everything." And he set it all up. And so I mean, all the kudos goes to Chuck on this one. But we're just so
Oh,
excited to have you. I mean,
there we go.
realistically, this is something that we never thought would be a possibility. So again, thank you for spending some time with us and get to tell your story because, like I said, the story of the steel yards being built and everything that goes behind it is behind a paywall with the Northwestern Times and Northwestern Indiana Times. So like everything kind of there's not a lot to kind of speak about, and I'm hoping with this gives everyone an access to kind of get to know the knowledge and the history behind the Railcats. So I guess the first question is going to be a little bit about yourself, Roger. What got you into baseball, and how did it lead you to Gary, Indiana?
Um, a love for baseball. Well, before I do that, let me talk a little bit about how Chuck found me. So I had put a couple jerseys on. My wife is saying you got to get rid of some of this stuff. And I put a couple of jerseys on, and I put a jersey on, and he bid on it. He like did half the price I had on it. And he's like haggling back and forth, that's not worth that, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I said, well, you pay this amount. I said, are you a Railcat fan? Because I had no idea
Mhm.
who this person even was. And he said, yes. I said, tell you what, you pay this, which was a really good price to begin with. And I'll send you a bunch of Railcat stuff.
Mhm.
And he didn't know that I was a GM or anything like that. And I assume when he got the stuff in the mail, he might have saw my name and put two and two together. But it was kind of I live in Montana right now,
Mhm.
so Bozeman, Montana. So I'm nowhere near Northwest Indiana. Anyway, back to your question. So baseball was always my first love growing up. I grew up in Harvey, Illinois, which is not too far from Northwest Indiana. Played Little League, played Babe Ruth. In fact, our team, South Holland, won the 1975. I'm dating myself here. 1975 Illinois State Championship for Babe Ruth. And we have our 50th anniversary next year. I digress a little bit, but played in high school, played in junior college at South Suburban College, which was Thornton Community College at the time. Went to Eastern Illinois, got cut there. Tried to walk on, and that's when I really focused my career on wanting to get into baseball. And my senior year, I wrote every major league and minor league team letters asking for jobs, and got ultimately an internship in Oklahoma City with the AAA team. So was there for 7 years. Left. I was the assistant GM, and then I was a GM for a Class A team in Fort Myers, Florida, for 4 years. Double A general manager for the Cubs Double A team in Orlando for 4 years. Um, and then the Cubs sold the team. The Cubs actually owned the team. They sold it to the Devil Rays. The Devil Rays, that was their name at the time. Um, they wanted to bring their own people in. My wife also has a sports background. She was working as marketing director for the University of Central Florida at the time. We just had a baby, had a couple offers to stay in baseball, and this will tie back into the Railcats in a minute. Um, but we didn't want to move. I mean, we stayed in Orlando, so for the next couple of years, worked for a company called Translux, and my job was to sell scoreboards to baseball teams. So I was in charge of every major league and minor league team in the country. I travel around selling these $1 million video boards, or try to sell them, the $1 million video boards. And it was good because I had a lot of connections in baseball. So back up when the Rays let me go, Devil Rays let me go, I was reached out to by a guy named Mike Tatoyan. And if you know RailCat history, you would know that name, but you'll know it more in a second. So Mike, when I was in Oklahoma City, he had a similar position in Tulsa. Tulsa was our AA team. We were the AAA team for the Texas Rangers. So I got to know him. So Mike called me after the Rays let me go and said, "Hey, would you like to be the GM in Mobile, Alabama?" And it just wasn't something that we wanted to do at that point. So I said, no, I'm going to stay with this scoreboard company. So fast forward a couple years, my job is to ferret out new stadiums around the country. So um, I knew they were building a stadium in Gary. So I called Marvin Goldkling, actually, who longtime St. Paul Saints owner, was my owner with the Miracle in Fort Myers, and asked him about the situation there. And he said, well, the ownership group is a couple of lawyers from Baker and Daniels and Mike Tatoyan. And, light went in my head. So I called Mike, A, to sell him a scoreboard, and B, we got in a conversation because we kept in touch about the job. And he said, would you be interested in the GM job? And I said, absolutely, let's talk. I mean, literally 2 days later, I flew to Midway Airport, met him at Midway, and this was in March of 2001. Pretty much sealed the deal that I was going to be the GM and the guy on the ground. Mike lived in St. Louis at the time. So there was some delays in the construction and the funding for the stadium. So I was kind of on hold for several months. And finally, everything was kind of a go and they signed off on it. And I moved up, and my first office was in my parents' basement in Dyer, Indiana, in July of 2001. And literally, after I moved out of my parents' basement, we got an office across the street from where the entrance is. It was a lawyer named Willie Harris at the time, and his office building, I'm sure, is still there. And I was in the corner office and right across the street, and kind of, watched the stadium go up, and was in meetings on what to do here and what to do there, and so forth and so on. So that's kind of a long story on the genesis of how I ended up in Gary. For me, it was an opportunity. There were a couple reasons that I took the job. Number one, my parents, like I said, lived in Dyer, and I wanted their grandkids to grow up near them. And, my mom passed away in 2007, and I'm forever grateful that I made the move for that. But more than that, as a baseball person or an operator, you don't get a chance to literally start a franchise from ground zero every day. And I remember I called my old uh, baseball coach at Thornton Community College. His name was Bill Brick, a longtime scout, lived in Cherville, Indiana for a long, long time, and very well known in baseball. He passed away a couple years ago as well. But I said, hey, what do you think about, baseball in Gary? He said, it'll never work. And then I said, well, they've offered me the job to be the GM. He said, take it. And, I said, why do you want me to take it if it's not going to work? He said, because if it does, that'll be a huge thing on your resume and a great feather in your cap. And, there were a lot of challenges at the beginning. I mean, you look at it 20 something years down the road, but getting the stadium built, trying to attract people to downtown Gary for family entertainment, at that point was not a slam dunk. But again, it was a very rewarding situation for me, and a big challenge. And it was a lot of fun as well.
Did it have the impact on your resume that you thought it would?
Yes. I mean, more than that, there's just so many good memories. I mean, to me, life is about memories and the people you meet and the things that you do and what you accomplish as well. And my experience in Gary, the first 10 years or so, I mean, it was just a progression of good things. So yeah, it was great.
Um, when you accepted that call, you came in, was the city of Gary a done deal, or was there the response that it still might not be Gary, it might be somewhere else?
No, it was pretty much by the time I got there, it was pretty much a done deal. However, about a month after I got there, the city council still had the it was originally earmarked for $25 million. So if you know, you may or may not know the background. So the funding for the stadium was garnered from the two casinos at the time in Gary. So there was a fund that the casinos paid every year to the city of Gary. And it was supposed to be used for development or urban development. And Scott King, the mayor at the time, earmarked it for a baseball stadium. Originally, it was $25 million. There was a lot of cost overruns for a lot of different reasons. And if you dig into it, there's some people that did some things they probably shouldn't have done. Um, and it ended up being a $45 million stadium.
Mhm.
So they needed another $20 million to complete the stadium. So after I got there, they had to have a special session for the city council to approve another $20 million. And there was a faction in Gary that it still didn't want it at that point, thought it was a waste of money, that they could have been spent other ways and so forth and so on. And I want to say the vote was, I can't remember how many people were on the council, but the vote was like 5-4,
Mhm.
to approve it. And if that wouldn't have been approved, I would have been moving back to Orlando. But thankfully it did. But also with that, there was some delays in the construction, and the stadium was not going to be completed by the 2002 season. So we ended up, when we went through it, there were a couple different choices. We could not play for the year. We could, play at a alternative site in Northwest Indiana, that wouldn't really, like a high school field, wouldn't have really worked. Or we could have been a travel team. And we ended up being a travel team. In retrospect, it worked out better for our operation because we had a completed stadium at the end of August of 2001 or 2002, and we had a whole winter to
Mhm.
market it. And the biggest thing at the beginning was getting people down to the stadium to see the scope of the project. I mean, people had no, I mean, it's still a beautiful stadium.
Mhm.
I mean, it ranks 20 years later, 25 years, almost 25 years later, it's still one of the nicer ballparks for that size in the country.
Mhm.
Um, and not only from a fan's perspective, but the locker rooms and the batting cage and all the other things that go, the offices, all the other things that go with running it, the suites that goes with running an operation, really played our favor in selling it to Northwest Indiana to be able to bring groups down there. I mean, the first event we had there was in September of 2002, and it was like a travel team. They played a game, and we had them out there. Ron Kittle came out and signed autographs, and we did introductions of the manager and well, not the manager because we didn't have, well, yeah, we did because it was a travel team. Joe came back,
Mhm.
Joe Capo-Pietra came back and was there as well, and it was just a fun opening. But it gave us the opportunity, and we actually played 30 high school games on that field before the RailCats ever played. In fact, the first person to ever hit a home run in the Steel Yard was a guy named Ryan Basham from Lowell High School,
Wow.
who ended up being a pretty good ball player at Michigan State. He was the captain of the Michigan State team. Um, and, so we had a lot, we had the ability to get people down there to see the steel yard, see that it wasn't the end of, it was safe and it was effective and all those things before we even played the first game.
Now, I have two questions, but this is going to be my first one. There's always been a rumor that I've heard that the whole reason why Gary was building a stadium was because of Donald Trump. That he had written up something that for him to bring the Miss America pageant to Gary, they had to have more entertainment. And that's how the stadium got built. Is that true or not?
That is not true as far as I know, but Donald Trump owned one of the casinos that funded that the funds went to from the stadium. And absolutely, the Miss USA contest was held in Gary in 2001 and 2002. And I went to the one, my wife was actually on the committee. And little known fact, so I wasn't there for the first contest, but the second contest, the after party was at South Lake Mall, because there
Okay.
wasn't a place to hold that many people. And Donald Trump was there. Tom Brady was there. Tom Brady was one of the judges at the Miss USA contest that year. The host that year was Deion Sanders,
Wow.
along with Allie Latner, who was a former winner, and she was famous for the Doritos commercials she did 20 years ago or whatever.
Mhm.
Jermaine Jackson was one of the judges. So it was a real. Peter Jennings was there and did a story on it for ABC News. It was really a cool event, but it was at the mall.
That's,
So I can
that's
remember, I can remember, I mean, Tom Brady and this was right after he won his first Super Bowl. So he wasn't, he was obviously a star, but not Tom Brady. And he was standing in the corner with one of his Michigan, I think, linemen, really the whole time, really didn't talk to anybody. And my wife went up and got his autograph, and but it was just kind of an interesting thing. The other thing about that night, it was he got like 12 inches of snow.
Oh,
I mean,
gee.
it really started right when the contest ended, and by the time we left the mall at, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever, I lived in Valpo at the time. It was a tough ride down 30 to get home.
And
So.
the other thing is the sore spot that we have now is the scoreboard. Is
yeah,
that one that you sold?
My company, well, I don't know if it's the same one, but if it is, to have it up there for 25 years, they're not made to last that long. I didn't
it's
sell it, but I think our company did buy it. Or we bought it from the company. That's actually one of the things I didn't like about working for the scoreboard company, that I would go in and sell these scoreboards to people I knew, and they really aren't designed to last, more than like 5 or 6 years. And if it is still, and it probably is still the same scoreboard, I mean that's going on, 23 years.
yeah. I mean,
Oh,
at least the outer portion is still the same. I don't know about like the actual video board itself is the
I
same,
would
but
I would say if it is the same, we just got the message that it shouldn't be this long, and we that's your
I
approval.
mean, no, it should, if it's still the same one, it's outlived its lifespan.
now I know the biggest thing about Gary, and it's still even today. I don't think it's as bad as it was when you first took over. But what were some of the bigger safety measures that you guys took to ensure that fans were safe going to the steel yard and being in the steel yard?
Well, a couple things. I think a presence of the police department, especially initially, was huge. The parking lots, lighting the parking lots and having them close was an issue as well. The reality is, if you're coming from wherever, Crown Point or Valpo, and you're not driving through the heart of Gary,
Right.
to get there. And I think you get off and take 45, or the highway or whatever you want. So I think the biggest trick for us at the beginning was, again, going back, getting people down there to have a safety comfortability, and the high school games actually really helped a lot because you had all these high school parents and from all over. I mean, from Gary, from some schools in Illinois, and back, Valpo and Crown Point and things like that. And the moniker that we used was, it's a region thing. We knew in order for us to succeed, we had to draw from the whole region. It wasn't going to be sustainable from just people from Gary. And we did surveys and stuff, and like 2 years in, and believe it or not, more people came from Valparaiso than any other town to our games in a general course. And we did get a lot of Gary residents as well. And I think the underlying positive thing that the stadium brought to Gary was people coming back and the name Gary in the paper and in the news and the box scores and things like that. And this, at the beginning, we had a Bennigan's out in left field or right field, I'm sorry, that did very well. And during the course of several years, there were restaurants and stuff around the stadium. I haven't been back in a long time, so I don't know what it looks like around the stadium right now. But it was trying to make people safe and come down and bring their kids. And at the time, Gary unfortunately wasn't associated with being the most safe place in the world. The reality is, at least when I was there, we never had any incident. I mean, and again, I think that's one of the things that's brought to light. Gary isn't like the end of the earth.
Right, right.
Yeah, I there hasn't been, I think maybe last year, the year before, it was completely in the off season that something happened in one of the parking lots, but like going to the game, there's not been one time that and anything has happened that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it was during a graduation, Gary High
Yeah.
School graduation, that something happened. So it was during the season, but it was when the guys were away and they had
Yeah.
loaned out the field. So, but I mean, they probably didn't have the security that the team has on a regular basis.
Even with the security, I mean, I would go, you know, to downtown Gary early in the morning and late at night, for basically 10 years. I never felt unsafe, I mean, in my route that I went. And um, I think it's a positive. And there's a lot of great people that supported it in Gary initially and still do to this day. I'm sure. I mean, Eddie Milton's the mayor now, and I knew Eddie, back when he was in NIPSCO. It was very supportive by almost everybody in Gary. And, there obviously at the beginning there were naysayers and how the money should be spent. But I think all in all, 20 something years later, they got to be happy with the result.
You can go back to our previous podcast. We talk all the time. I sit on the first base side next to the visitors dugout, and I talk to the players the whole game. And I have yet to come across a player that has anything negative to say about our field or about our stadium. And that's 20 years later, right? I mean, it's wonderful. So the effort that you put into it, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, not yeah, and not only that, Chuck. I think at least back in the day, and I'm sure it's based on your conversation right there, when the players came in, they were impressed with the stadium, and it was actually for years a recruiting tool. Greg Taggart used it. I mean, the locker room is nice, and I assume it's still nice. We had a nice weight room in there and the batting cage indoors. I mean, there were things about that facility that you don't get with the other teams in the league. Maybe Winnipeg and maybe some of the newer stadiums, but if you compared it to even Schaumburg and Joliet at the time, it was a much better stadium than both of those places.
Yeah, I mean, even they brought in a new team to the American Association, the Lake Country Dockhounds, and it looks like they kind of put it on a high school baseball field and threw some stadiums on the sides, and that's about it. So, like, at least in the American Association, maybe outside of Lincoln, it's been one of the best facilities that we've seen as far as on the field product or on the field, like the field itself product, and then like the anemones around it.
Well, and to your point, yeah, Lincoln is extremely nice, but it's run by the University
Yeah,
of Nebraska.
yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, no, we've had that discussion already about
Exactly.
that, but for the resources that are being used for Gary, I mean, throughout, I would say almost all of independent baseball or the MLB partner leagues that they call it now, it's probably still 20 years later, one of the top facilities in that department.
Kyle, refresh my memory. Has Lincoln won Field of the Year 230 years in a
I think
row?
so, something like
I
that.
think I think when Lincoln got their field, they went back to all the previous fields of the year and removed their trophies and gave them all to Lincoln. So, I mean, I always say we fund our own,
Now,
we've got a beautiful field.
obviously, you have a stadium, but one person can't run the stadium in and of itself. So, you get the stadium built and you start hiring people. What were some of the first things to check off the box that you were looking for as far as, was it management or manager, or was it like, the operations kind of side? What was your kind of checklist to start hiring people?
Well, the first two people I hired were from Gary, a guy named Jim Smith, who was our PR guy, our marketing guy, kind of a whiz of computers and stuff. And the second person was Keisha Henry, who was also from Gary, and she did some of our PR stuff. So Keisha, neither one of them really had any sports background, but where we were sitting when we first started, we didn't need somebody with sports background. We needed local people to have a connection with the community because we weren't going to play for a year.
Yeah.
So those were the first two people I hired, and we hired a receptionist called, her name was Betty Hoggs. And it was really the four of us to start with. And 6 or 7 months later, we made our first quote unquote baseball hire. A guy named Kevin Sputic, who worked for the White Sox, who's from Highland, Indiana, had worked for the White Sox for 10 years or so. And we hired him as the assistant GM. And, he was the first one besides myself that had any baseball background. And he was a sales guy.
Mhm.
So he was our lead salesperson besides myself, obviously. But he did a lot of the sponsorship sales from the beginning, and then from there, eventually we hired a ticket manager and so forth. And then when we moved into the stadium, um, we expanded the staff a little bit more. And as far as the manager was concerned, our first manager was a guy named Joe Cafelpietra, who I believe now is the manager in Kansas
Yep.
City. So Joe had worked in Allentown and came very highly recommended as a baseball guy. And Mike Tatoyan and I interviewed him at, again, Midway Airport, and decided to hire him before we knew it was going to be a travel team. And then when it was designated that we were going to travel all year, he stayed on board. He actually won Manager of the Year that year. And at the time, we had the best, it's still a losing record, but we had the best record of any travel team ever at that
Mhm.
point. And he kept it together, and we were in the hunt in the second half until the last week or so of the season. And then Joe decided after the first year, he was offered the job with the New Jersey Jackals
Mhm.
of the Atlantic League, I think it
Yes.
was at the time. And so it was close to his home in Allentown, had no qualms about him going. So he left us after the first year. When I lived in Northwest Indiana and Joe would come to town, we'd go out to lunch and stuff. Still stay in contact with him. Um, but he did a fantastic job the first year because there was a lot of things that first year. I mean, we had a situation in Winnipeg where our second baseman Billy Malone ran into, or they together collided to Scott Goodman, our right fielder, and Scott broke his leg in Winnipeg, and it was a really nasty, nasty injury, and it was not easy to get him back to Northwest Indiana. He had to have surgery in Winnipeg and so forth. I don't want to digress too much, but there was a lot of things. We did a couple road trips with buses, to Joliet and to Schaumburg. We actually took our team photo in Schaumburg, of the first year's team. But again, we were trying to just acclimate people to baseball and get excited about it. Our trip to Joliet, we had like 50 people on a bus, and it worked out really, really well.
The 0-2. Swing and a miss, strike three. Wrap this one up in green and